All right. Well, now let's move on to the issue of modernization. Okay. You guys have probably heard the term modernization, but I think it's probably a little different from what you are used to thinking about, or the way you used to think about it. And so let's just go ahead and start with that. I'm going to define modernization as to look like the West, right? And what that means is that a country has an industrialized economy and a liberal government, all right? So industrialized, we just talked about what was an industrialized economy, and we're going to talk about in a few minutes why industrialization leads to democratization. But remember, we talked about earlier what we mean when we say liberty with an exclamation point. It's three different things. What are they?
So like freedom
guys, look in your
to
notes.
produce, freedom to make money. I don't remember exactly.
Well, that's part of it. That's capitalism, right? Capitalism was the third one. Laissez-faire capitalism. Laissez-faire, right? So that was the third one. The first one, though, was what? One person, one vote.
Democracy.
Popular sovereignty, democracy. So democracy, and then there was one in the middle that had to do with religion. What was that?
Secularism.
Democracy, secularism, capitalism. Don't forget, right? Democracy, secularism, capitalism. Because all three of those things together are called liberalism. In order to be a modernized country, you have to have an industrial economy and a liberal government, okay? There were instances of countries that had the industrial economy, but their government wasn't very liberal, but they were not very long lasting, okay? Well, let's think about what countries then would we say were modernized countries. Can you guess? Which countries in the world in, say, 1800, which countries had industrial economies and liberal governments?
The West.
Right. Which ones, though? The West.
Europe.
What countries?
Europe.
Okay. What part of Europe? It's
Europe.
actually not all of Europe, but you're right. It's Western Europe, so we're talking about United States, Britain, France,
Germany,
Russia.
Belgium, not Spain, not Italy, not Russia, right? Just those. So we have England, France, Belgium, Germany, and that was it, right? England, France, Belgium, Germany. United States is one of these modernized countries. It modernizes in the second half of the 19th century after the Civil War. So modernization is going to be associated with Europe and the United States, Western Europe and the United States. All right, you guys are with me? Questions, comments? Okay. We didn't talk about this much, but we'll talk about it now. And what happens is, and this actually goes all the way back to the discovery of America. When America was discovered, Europeans gained access to crops that made it possible for less people to feed more, to produce enough food to feed more people, right? So if you'll recall, I think I'm pretty sure I mentioned to you that during the Middle Ages, the population of Europe was essentially stagnant, meaning that it stayed constant. Every now and then it would go through a growth spurt, but then there'd be a famine or a plague, and it would go back to somewhere around normal. So the population of Europe essentially was stagnant throughout the Middle Ages. But after the discovery of America, they discovered a staple crop that made it possible for less people to produce more food. Does anybody want to know does anybody know what that crop was?
Wheat.
Corn.
Wheat.
Well, it was neither one. Actually, the big one was they already had wheat. They didn't have corn, but that was something they would get. But the big one was potatoes. I know that sounds very unsexy, doesn't it? Right? But in reality, what happens was the introduction of the potato into Europe made it possible for the European population to start to grow. And it continued to grow from then all the way up until after World War II. And after World War II, it starts to decline, okay? Like in the United States. But at any rate, the point here is that this making it possible for less people to produce more food disrupts the agrarian economy, because now people that had been necessary before to grow food so that everybody had enough are no longer needed, right? So I don't know if you guys will remember or maybe have watched or experienced the Christmas Carol by Dickens, Charles Dickens, right? And I'm sorry?
I was just saying Dickens.
And one of the things that Scrooge says in there is, let them die and decrease the surplus population. What's he talking about when he says surplus population? He's talking about there's more people available to work than there is work for them to do. You get what I'm saying? This is one of the reasons why the factory owners were able to keep the wages so low, is because if one person didn't work, the next person they could get somebody else to do it, right? Okay, so what then happens is that because they are no longer needed on the fiefs, in the agrarian, in the fields, right? And also because the new owners of these fiefdoms, the bourgeoisie essentially, are closing off, fencing in the fields so that the peasants can no longer work them, then they are going to move. And where are they going to move to? Well, they're going to move to the cities, because that's where the factories are, and that's where they're going to be able to essentially try to find some work. And so they'll move, let's say, from somewhere in the middle of nowhere in England to Manchester, which is an industrial city. But once they get to Manchester, they realize that there's hardly any work there because there's so many workers. So they'll book passage on a ship to America, right? They'll either go to the United States, might go to Mexico or Brazil, Argentina, right? They'll go throughout the Americas, and what that will do then is lead to a massive movement of people from or actually throughout the 19th century. Okay, so that's going to be something that accompanies. When I talked about the potato, that is going to be what's the word I'm looking for? It's going to be supplemented or exacerbated by the fact that they introduce new technologies to agriculture, like rotating crops and things like that, so that they can make more food, but they don't need as many people to make it. Okay, so that's going to be then the essentially what we see then is that instead of the world, or the Western world, the industrial world, being a world centered on villages, it becomes a world centered on urban areas, on cities. And we start to see huge cities grow. London, New York, Boston, right? These are 10 times or more bigger than any of the biggest cities in the world during the Middle Ages, right? In the 19th century, okay? Questions, comments about this? Not San Diego. San Diego was still a little baby in the 1850s.